Hill on Kentucky Rex's channel for the first time in a while since the YouTube policies on having less than 1,000 subscribers. You guys have helped me be able to go live again, even though I don't have 1,000 subscribers. So my stuff is still going to be restricted to a degree. I have a little extra time before I have to go to bed, so I got to work overtime tonight. So I wanted to do a little video. So I suppose if we get people joining, that'll be great. But if they don't, we'll carry on anyways. Um, because it will back up the page here, which is 6:30, almost 7 o'clock in the morning. So probably won't get that many viewers, but we'll do this anyway because I like to have content on my channel. Um, so we'll run everything without a filter. I need to look up some relevant information ready to look up. All right. Okay. So let's go down to that's the relevant information there. Okay. We have the spell in question. This one's a doozy, guys, by the way. So it's I'm surprised by how absolutely ridiculous the situation was. Let me go to the group in question. So we're going to go because this was something that I saw earlier this week. It was actually a couple days ago, and I actually responded to it there, and I kind of use it as an opportunity to pick the mind of the player that posted. In my opinion, the player had every right to be mad. So, his obviously his thoughts are very candid and unfiltered. So strong language warning. I'm not going to be censoring any of it. I'm going to be speaking exactly as he typed it. So this is in the Christian D&D community on Facebook. So this is a player that posted. This was posted December 3rd. This is a group, by the way, that I had posted that a GM's job is to be a fair and impartial referee. And this same group kicked back at me. No, it's your job to be a storyteller, and the dice fudging isn't that bad, and that kind of thing. And I thought it was funny because this post kind of vindicates my position. I'll explain why. All right, so the post as written. Had a bad time as a player some time ago. You think this was a fair call on my DM's part? So I was playing a wizard for the first time in my first lengthy campaign. We get through Lost Mines, talk about Lost Mines of Fandelver, and then through most of Storm King's Thunder. I'm level 11 divination wizard. We come within a mile or so of a big giant encampment that we're tasked with essentially defeating, as far as we know. I've got a new spell perfect for this situation, Arcane Eye. We make camp, make sure we're out of sight, and about to take a long rest. I cast Arcane Eye, and I scout out the whole giant encampment in advance. Weak points, entrances, etc. Excuse me, indigestion. But no enemies are there. Red flag, right? Yeah, we'll get there. I make sure to look around everywhere on the way to the encampment, and in the encampment, nothing. Just before I finish looking around, and we develop a strategy for taking on the encampment, suddenly all the enemies from that encampment magically find us and attack us. Dumbass giants and goblins, not exactly geniuses. We win the fight pretty easily. I cast a bunch of fireballs and keep up my arcane eye concentration, no problem. My DM literally complains out loud and word for word. The whole point of this attack was to shut down that arcane eye. I'm sorry, but that strikes me as a piss poor excuse for a DM to do anything. I agree. You don't like that I have a new spell that you didn't anticipate, so you bend the rules to shut me down and waste my spell. Then give me shit as a player because you failed at your cheap metagaming gimmick. There you go. This is why being a fair and impartial referee is important. This is why it's our job. I didn't break the rules. I asked for permission, and the whole time, every step of the way, my playing my spell section to a T, and you DM are just mad that it worked. That felt terrible on my end. I felt bad for doing something well, and disincentivized the whole point of my character planning in advance via divination. Okay, so obviously within within 5e, the whole reason why you have a wizardry school is because you have so many different spells that your particular school it's cheaper. In the campaign I play an evocation wizard. So I get all the powerful mushroom cloud spells, but I don't hurt my teammates because I can sculpt spells. So that's the whole thing. Um, I like playing in 5e as a player. I would hate to do it as a DM. And I've been very open and candid about that. So let's talk about the spell in question real quick. So number one, and I understand this is culture shock to a lot of the people that are on the 5e forums, but instead of going to Twitter and asking the people that made the game how they would rule it, your DM should make a ruling on it. Well, people wrote to Gary Gygax, yeah, but Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson and all them put stuff in their books that said quit writing us. It's your job we've already done enough thinking for you. It's your job as the DM to make rulings on stuff like this. Case in point. So anyway, Arcane Eye, fourth level divination spell. Costs one action. That's nothing new. 30 feet of range. Okay, there you go. Um, Target a point within range, so he has to cast it pretty close to where he is, at least within 30 feet of himself. Uh, Within the campsite. Components VSM. The material is a bit of bat fur, so it's nothing monetary. It's assumed that if it doesn't cost anything, that's in your spell components pouch. So, in my opinion, that's kind of a mechanic I don't really like very much. Um, because what's the point? Either make it cost something or not. But anyways, concentration up to 1 hour. Okay, so we have this in the case. Uh, the only class that can learn it is a wizard. You create an invisible magical eye within range that hovers in the air for the duration. Now, keep in mind, invisible magical eye. So, and I'll get to how I would run this here in a minute. You mentally receive visual information from the eye, which has normal vision and dark vision, out to 30 feet. The eye can look in every direction. As an action, you can move the eye up to 30 feet in any direction. There is no limit to how far away from you the eye can move, but it can't enter in another plane of existence. So if you got like those crazy games where it like can enter like the planes of hell or Hades or whatever it's called, it can't do that. A solid barrier blocks the eye's movement, but the eye can pass through an opening as small as 1 inch in diameter. So any smaller it can't go through. So it has limits, but it's a pretty useful spell. It's a utility spell. Let's go to the spell section for 5e, right? So let's talk about this whole thing. The whole point of this spell is concentration, right? That's the whole point. So in 5e, spells have two different kinds of durations: instantaneous and concentration. Instantaneous, self-explanatory. You do something, it happens then and there. Uh, Concentration, it could happen then and there, but some spells don't. And this one in particular does happen then and there, but because you can keep it up for an hour, you have to concentrate on it. So, some spells require you to maintain concentration in order to keep their magic active. If you lose concentration, such a spell ends. If a spell must be maintained with concentration, the fact that fact appears in its duration entry, and the spell specifies how long you concentrate on it. In this case, an hour. You can end concentration at any time. No action required. Normal activity such as moving and attacking does not interfere with the concentration. Um, so the battle itself would not have broken concentration. Uh, the following factors can break concentration. Casting another spell that requires concentration, obviously, because it'd be too taxing mentally for you to concentrate on two different things, two different powerful spells at the same time. Like you're going to have to choose one or the other. Taking damage, that makes sense. You hit your pain threshold. Obviously, you're just like because I've hurt myself and forgotten things before. I'm sure everybody has. Being incapacitated or killed. That one's pretty self-explanatory. Obviously, if you lack the mental cognition to perform the task, you can't concentrate on it. And even more so if you have become recently deceased. So, the GM might also decide that certain environmental phenomena, such as a wave crashing over you while you're on a storm tossed ship, require you to succeed on a DC 10 Constitution saving throw to maintain concentration on a spell. Uh, so yeah, we're dealing with the game that has DC checks instead of save tables, which is how I would run it honestly. Because in my opinion, it should be easier for a level 20 wizard to be able to keep up concentration than a level 1 wizard. This is why the tables exist. So let's break this down. Was this a fair call on my DM's part? Absolutely not. This was a terrible call. This is probably, and the whole purpose is a learning experience. I don't do this to put anybody down. This is my response. As somebody who is a player in 5e, but does not want to run 5e campaigns, prefers to run BNX or BX clones um, because of their simplicity. Like, this is my response and how I would run it. If for whatever odd reason I did happen to become a, if whatever reason somebody asked me to become a 5e dungeon master. Okay, so that's making me that's driving me nuts. So anyway, was this a fair call on my DM's part? Absolutely not. I think your complaints are more than just a little bit valid. Uh, Playing Wizard first time, da da da, level 11, da da da. Come within a mile or so of a giant encampment that we're tasked with. So, really, I'm going to pull something up real quick that will probably help shed a little light. They're within a mile or so of this giant encampment, right? We're going to pull something up, and I'm going to use. You're probably going to disagree and want me to use 5e's rule books, but number one, I'm not paying for garbage that falls apart. Number two, uh, I could care less what their rules say because the people who made the game don't even care what the rules say. So that's my opinion on it. And most players don't even care what the rules say. They just end up going on Twitter and asking the people who made the game what the rules are supposed to mean, when that's the dungeon master's job. So I want to go down specifically to the encounter. I believe it's in the encounter section, right? So they're within a mile or so of this encampment, right? So we'll get there. So I've got a table in here. It's in the Wilderness Adventure section. It's on page 38 of the Basic Fantasy RPG core rule book, right? So if this thing can move 30 feet in a round, that means in one day it can move up to 18 miles. So how many miles of hour is that? So it's 1.5 miles an hour. So in my opinion, this thing shouldn't have been even able to even reach the encampment after an hour. If it was this far away, it shouldn't have been able to. So I would say that a little bit of math would have helped out in this particular instance. So my ruling would have been it's not going to reach. If it's within a mile, no, you're not going to get there. Yeah. So, well, no, you could cover. No, yeah, you could cover 1.5 miles an hour, but you're not going to have a whole lot of time left. So, is it worth it at that point? Um, because you're barely making it, and now you're going to try to go through this entire encampment. Now, but I probably would have if we're assuming this is within a mile though, because he doesn't even know. Obviously as the player, he doesn't even know. Now, whether or not the dungeon master knows, that's a different story, because the dungeon master doesn't even know how to run this section. But okay, if it's 2 miles, no, he's not even going to reach it. If it's 1.5 miles, no, he's not going to reach it. It's going to dissipate before it ever reaches. But 1 mile, that's a maybe. It's going to get close, and you're cutting it short. I would say at that point, okay, because you're reaching there, and you've got basically 30 minutes left, more or less, to scope this place out. So the question is, should you be able to scope this entire place out in 30 minutes? Now, number one, I wouldn't. If I was running the game, you wouldn't be able to essentially map this place out in like 30 minutes. But be that as it may, I understand this from module. The dungeon master didn't make it, but this is why I encourage dungeon masters, game masters, whatever. Oh, we got a viewer. Hello. This is why I encourage dungeon masters and game masters to reconstruct the dungeons in their books to suit the play style. So I would say, and then we lost a viewer. Oh well. I would say at this point, oh hey, blessings, my brother. That's James Breeden. So I would say at this point, the player is not going to be able to scope out very much of this encampment for their spell. I would say that they're going to lose all the time and blah blah blah. They're going to scope out enough, like a section. I would have reconstructed the entire encampment. It's not a hard thing to do, really. Just add a few walls and different paths, and like throw up some doors and stuff. You can do it within like a half hour. So that's how I would do it. I had to do that with the Old Island Fortress because it came to our attention that somebody in our server had played Old Island Fortress before or ran it before. Caveat, they did it a long time ago, but sure that there was no chance that they were going to remember anything. So I reconstructed everything. It didn't take too long. I added some new things and put some things here and over there, and moved some stuff around. But it's all good. So that's what I would have done here. I would have made it hard for the player to scope this out, because how would the player know that you reconstructed this? Exactly. They would have to either admit to cheating or just take the L on this one, in my opinion. That's the counter right there. So if this arcane eye can reach there in an hour, which it can, it's going to barely make it because it's going to be able to travel an hour, 1.5 miles in 1 hour, 1.5 miles an hour. So it'll reach there, but it's getting ready to fizzle. So it's only going to be able to get certain things. And I would put everything I could in its way to make sure that it couldn't do that. If I was looking to counter it. Now, if I wasn't looking to counter it and I was wanting to reward the player, or I just didn't care enough and I thought it was an interesting idea, whatever. If my point being, I wouldn't do it on the fly. Um, like I would reconstruct the dungeon beforehand, before the spell was ever cast. I wouldn't be doing it on the fly. It's too late at that point. The cat's out of the bag. They've earned it. You might as well let them have it. They earned it. Um, so this is an invisible eye, by the way. So enemies can't see it. Enemies not going to even know it's there. I think the only thing that could ever detect it would probably be detect magic, because it's a magical eye, so it's going to be able to get spotted by magic. And I would rule that. I don't give a crap what any 5e game maker says on Twitter. That's how I would run it, and that's how it will be ran in that instance if I was running this. So, but yeah, if I didn't reconstruct this and I didn't put enough stuff in the way, because obviously, like, it's limited by barriers, I would just go ahead. The player in this, you might as well let them have it. But I would probably throw some, not necessarily reconstruct the fort, but probably throw in some obstacles in the way, like, oh, there's like piles of get back up here. There's like piles of crates and stuff like that to kind of block out the eye. Like the eye's gonna have to work its way around, and eventually it's gonna fizzle out. So no enemies are there. So that's the next big red flag. So no enemies are there in this encampment, and there was none on the way to the encampment for this arcane eye to see. Now here's where I have a problem with this, right? So, like, if I was running this, if I was the dungeon master for this session, and this player cast arcane eye, and it was going up. Now this is why I'm wondering monster tables exist. So at this point, I wouldn't even roll for the presence of monsters. I would roll for the monsters themselves. I would let, like, okay, here's a giant scorpion over here. You know it's there. Or there's a herd of antelope. Whatever works, that's your choice. But that's how I would run it. I would put, like, so, because in my opinion, the first mistake was having a barren world for this arcane eye to travel through before it reached the encampment. That is the biggest sin, because, in my opinion, because that shows that your world is not breathing and alive. That kills immersion. Your players, 99% of players, I don't care what edition you're playing, 99% of players sit down at a table to immerse themselves in gameplay. Now, whatever the philosophy of that game is, whatever the philosophy of that edition is, whatever, but by and large, broadly, no matter the edition, it's something that transcends all the editions. Players sit down to play a game, to be immersed, to play a character, to be a part of a world. And your world has no animals in it for the arcane eye to see. And then when it's reaching the encampment, there's no enemies at the encampment. And so, number one, your first mistake was not putting obstacles in the way for this arcane eye. Number two, you should have reconstructed the fort before the session started. That way this eye had, I mean, don't specifically plan for that. I just think it's a good idea for game masters and dungeon masters to strip down dungeons and then reconstruct them. Just on the off chance somebody's played this module before, right? So, your second mistake was not doing that. Your third mistake is there's no goblins keeping guard. There's no giants walking around. Like, your encampment's not even an encampment. It's like this barren, abandoned place. Like, okay, so there's giants and goblins that are supposed to be at this encampment. Then have goblins, like, okay, here's a goblin hunting party coming back or going to a hunt. Or Here's a couple goblins that are like patrolling the walls, patrolling the perimeter. There's a giant cooking like this buffalo or whatever on an open fire. Like, make your monsters do stuff. They exist. They're a part of the ecosystem of the world they live in. They need to eat, they need to sleep, and they need to poop and reproduce. So I'm not saying being graphic with everything. I'm just saying that you should imply that these are living things and not just numbers on a piece of paper. That's what I'm trying to imply here. But they don't even exist in the encampment. The reason that they're in the world, they're not even there. So going on to the next part of this, to this post, is that suddenly their campsite is attacked by the giants and the goblins that they should had been at the encampment. And by the way, the arcane eye should have seen coming their way. Here's what could have been cool, because even if the arcane eye failed to scope out the encampment, it could have warned the players of the coming giants and goblins. So they're, as they said in the post, they're getting ready to take a long rest. They're still within a mile, as far as they know, of this fort. In my opinion, the eye shouldn't have made it, but be that as it may, they're almost there, but they're going to have to camp out. So they're going to have to take a long rest. Arcane Eye comes in handy for setting up watch. So like this would set up a situation where they wouldn't be took by surprise. They thanks for the like, by the way. I see I've got another viewer. Hello, good morning. I'm getting ready to go to bed here a little bit because I gotta work overtime tonight. I had a little free time, and the wife had to go do something, so I had free time. But anyway, this gives the eye another reason besides scoping out the encampment to exist. You gave this level 11 wizard Arcane Eye, and he wants to use it. So, speaking of somebody who's played an Evocation Wizard in 5e, that's an alarm that I had set for something else. But that doesn't even matter today. But, anyways, somebody who's played an Evocation Wizard in 5e campaign, that sometimes my spells took a turn or had a usefulness to them I didn't expect. We used Tiny Hut, for example. For the longest time, it was just a way for us to get to sleep without having to set up watch. Then it got to the point where we started using it as a defensive position in battles, if I could set it up ahead of time. So that spells have use, right? So like this is not an OSR versus 5e thing. This is how do you run your game? Like this is like, because I would never run a 5e game, but if I did, for whatever reason, I had to, I wouldn't have run it like this. I would have run it what I just said. I would have gave the spell a reason to exist besides just scoping out the whole point. So again, I don't blame the DM for trying to come up with a counter to this spell, but he kind of dug his own hole here. Like he showed just how much prep he puts into his world. None. And it shows how barren his world is. Which I understand he's using a module, but I don't think it's the fault of the module because as far as I know, these modules come with monsters that you didn't use. It's stupefying to me. So they win the fight pretty easily, by the way. So again, he casts a bunch of fireballs. He keeps up his Arcane Eye concentration without a problem. Meaning that if he took damage, he obviously didn't die. So he didn't have to lose his concentration like that or become incapacitated. If he took damage, he passed his saves to keep the Arcane Eye up, keep his concentration up. So he succeeds. And so the DM, this is how you know this was a DM versus player mentality. The whole point, the DM says out loud and word for word, quote, the whole point of this attack was to shut down that Arcane Eye, end quote. So, okay, I find it vindicating because this same Facebook group that I posted that a GM's job is to be a fair and impartial referee, this proves my point. Because if you take a tiny hut is a good spell, clever use of the spell, absolutely. But you were if you were um, so if you take a game master, dungeon master, referee, whatever term you want to use, versus player mentality, then this leads to hurt feelings. Now, I think I'm a firm believer that if you had a mutual agreement beforehand that this is the way you wanted to run the game, and your players were okay with that, and if everybody could be mature adults about it, I think it could be done. I don't think it's a very good idea, but I think it could be done. Um, but I have a feeling that this is not what happened. This was a dungeon master that took this mentality on because the curtain's getting ripped back from his surprise and he had no answer for it. And instead of taking the L on this one, he got mad and he made monsters disappear and then reappear from thin air specifically to screw the players over. Well, not the players, but a player specifically. As he says, the whole point was to shut down the arcane eye, to take something away from the player. I see I've got another viewer. Hello, good morning to you. Uh, I don't know how much longer I'll be on, so I'm hoping to wrap up pretty soon. But uh, the whole point, right? So this is why being a fair and impartial referee is important for being a GM, right? Because number one, when you take this GM versus player mentality, this causes nothing but hurt feelings and it causes nothing but trouble at the table. And I don't care if it's a real table, a Discord server, or a play by post. If you take that mentality, eventually feelings are going to get hurt. Especially when it's very apparent from this situation that he had a specific player in mind to screw over in this situation. He was wanting to make the concentration go away on this arcane eye. And in my opinion, this player earned it at this point because of this dungeon master's lack of preparation for his game. Number two, if you're the kind of GM or DM, referee, whatever term you want to use, if you're the kind of person that fudges dice rolls and decides to have your players succeed narratively, and again, I believe that's a railroad, whether you want to admit that or not. But then a situation like this occurs, and of course you're going to take that away. Well, now you've made it really. Now you've caused more hurt. You've caused even more hurt feelings than the GM versus player mentality, because at least with the GM versus player mentality, they expected it. So it's one of those situations where I don't understand. I really don't. Why anybody would take this particular opportunity to really they're hurting their players. And when you hurt your players, you're hurting the table. Okay? So there's this so I know we don't talk about table etiquette a whole lot, right? So we don't talk about table etiquette a whole lot, but we honestly should. Um, Table etiquette. You have this. We talk about. You sometimes hear talk about the social contract. Normally, my social contract is nothing more than we sit down, we play a game. I'm going to be, because I'm normally the forever GM. I'm going to do my best to be a fair and impartial referee. I'm going to make sure that when my players earn something, they earn something. Excuse me. When they receive the consequences of their actions, they receive the consequences of their actions. Whether it's a lack of preparation or doing something stupid. Or, in the case of bad dice rolls, simple chaos. The dice rolls don't the dice rolls don't represent success and failure, they represent chaos. Just as quickly as they can, as they reward you, they'll punish you. This is why having a player skill over character skill mentality is important. But anyway, be that as it may. So this player says, he he okay, to quote the end of the end of the post, you don't like that I have a new spell that you didn't anticipate. Exactly. Because a lack of preparation makes for a bad game master, a bad referee. I'll be honest. I have my moments, so I can't plan for everything. But I try to come up with ideas for my players to have. I might not have the whole entire world fleshed out, but I will try to have them run into something. Sometimes a wandering monster encounter can start something. But, um, so didn't anticipate. You bend the rules to shut me down. Exactly. And waste my spell. Exactly. Because this was somebody who was not being a fair and impartial referee. This very same Facebook group that I posted that in and I received so much kickback from. This is what I'm talking about. This is what starts that. This is why you're supposed to be a fair and impartial referee. Being a fair and impartial referee doesn't mean I kill my players. Being a fair and impartial referee means I look out for my players. I make sure that they earn their things. I make sure that when they do earn their things, they earn their things. And that when they get punished, they earned that punishment too. This is what being the fair and impartial referee means. This is why the term referee is still a thing that pops up even in 5e. Even like all you have to do is go to the 5e Dungeon Master's Guide and it still says referee in it. So that's the whole point of our job. Because you can only be, okay, let's take a sport. You can only be a referee if you're a fair and impartial referee. Yeah, I know. When does that happen? But that's what they're supposed to do. Just because you have bad referees doesn't mean you don't have good referees that exist. And I try to strive to be a good referee for my games. This is why being a fair and impartial referee should be stressed over being a lore master or a story smith or a world builder or whatever. I don't care a single thing about any of that. I really don't. I don't give a crap about the world. I really don't. Because I'll tell you something. I'll tell you one thing that I took away when I first became a game master. I ran a homebrewed dungeon for my players. It was in the basic fantasy RPG system. I ran the Chapel of the Hyena. It was a knoll chapel. It was dedicated to a hyena god, and I had a name for it. And there was a puzzle that involved an idol, this, that, and everything else. I tell you what, those players don't remember a single friggin' thing about the name of that hyena god, but they remember the time they had romping through that dungeon. They remember the skeleton fights. They remember finding the kidnapped halfling that was stuffed down the well in like to this sacrificial chamber to this giant dog god. Like they remember that. They don't remember the name of that giant dog god, but that doesn't matter because I don't give a crap about that. That's not what I care about. I care about whether my players had fun, and they had fun. They ran everything. I told them what they could do, what they couldn't do, and that was it. Because those questions were so few and far between, it didn't matter. Can I do this? Yes. Can I do this? No. Okay. So they figured something else out. And they, because it wasn't just a heck, because this was a long drawn out dungeon. They could have died, but they didn't. They were level 3 party romping through this place. But so that's why being a fair and impartial referee works, because honestly, fair and impartial referees keep their players alive more than referees that railroad their players with dice fudging. Because a dice fudging referee will kill a character if it makes narrative sense to do that. I don't do that. If they died, it's because of a trap or a monster. That's it. So, but anyway, um, then you give me shit as a player because you failed at your cheap metagaming gimmick. Exactly. This is what metagaming is. He didn't come up with a counter until it became apparent that it was a problem and inconvenient to him. This is what metagaming is. That's what metagaming is. So, it's one thing to discuss outside on the table strategies. Like, for example, one of the groups I run, they realized that monsters in a particular part of the dungeon, like they had a TPK, they went back in and then ran into totally different monsters than they did before. They figured it was a good idea to put up barricades, and it was a good idea. And they spent the next 2 weeks building these barricades. Excuse me, building these barricades, bringing them down to the dungeon, setting them up. So they talked about outside the game, but it's something their characters wanted to do. That's not metagaming. But what's metagaming is you come up with a solution simply because it's inconvenient. Right? So like that was the whole point of the whole reason of the enemy attack. So the Arcane Eye should have seen the enemies coming to begin with, but it didn't. Why? Because it was inconvenient for the Dungeon Master in this situation for it to happen. So this is what happens when you have a railroadie. This is why you need to be a fair and impartial referee as a game master or a dungeon master, whatever term you want to use. That's I know I've harped on that for the last 10 minutes, but that's why that's important. That's why that should be your first and foremost responsibility. Because being a fair and impartial referee avoids hurt feelings at the table. It ensures people keep coming back to play your games. It ensures players think that you are good. You can be the crappiest dungeon master in the world, and people will still play your games because you just ran by the rules. You had nobody's special interest at heart. You just ran a world. You ran how monsters should act. That was it. Okay, so I want to point something out real quick. We need to start thinking like 10-year-olds again. Now, I don't mean being immature. What I mean by that is, okay, go look up, when you get the time, go look up Mold Vase Basic and Cook's Expert Sets. You don't have to have the PDF. I'm not telling you to download the PDF, but you should download it. But that's not what I'm telling you. I'm not telling you to spend money right now. What I'm telling you to do is go look at an image search of the covers. Look what it says on the covers. It says for ages 10 and up. If it is simple enough for a 10-year-old to run, then that's how it should be ran. It shouldn't require this much of a headache. This was a headache. And the sad part is a 10-year-old could come up with a solution to this. What was the solution? Have the monsters in the world. Have the monsters in the encampment. Have the monsters in the wilderness. That was the whole entire, that's all you had to do. Was put monsters in the world that is supposed to be alive. Didn't do that. Why? Because he wanted them to take it by surprise. And you can't have a surprise if you got a magical floating eye floating around. But anyways, so continuing on. I didn't break any rules. That's right, player. You didn't break any rules. You're not the one in the wrong here. Every step of the way, I planned my spell selection to a T, and you, DM, are mad that it worked. Exactly, because it was inconvenient for his little railroad. Exactly. So, again, like, as somebody who, I would never run a 5e campaign, but I don't mind being a player in a 5e campaign. I don't mind being a player character. I run an evocation wizard, and I know what you're talking about, because the evocation spells are cheaper for you to learn and to write in your book. So I get that. Yes. So I'm cool with that. I don't care. That can be a little metagamey, but I'm not, but like it makes sense that a wizard that goes to a particular school would know about that kind of stuff. That felt terrible on my end. Yes, player, yes. You have every right to feel that way. I would feel that crappy too. That's a pretty shitty thing to do. I agree with you. That's a really crappy thing to do. I felt bad for doing something well. You shouldn't. You did nothing wrong. You did everything, like you did everything right. The DM, number one, the DM should have figured out how far away this friggin' place was for the eye, because again, I wouldn't have put it close enough for the eye to work. But be that as it may, if it happened to be within range, then there's nothing you could do about that. But he didn't plan nothing. He didn't prepare nothing. He just got mad because it was inconvenient for him. So no, you did nothing wrong, and you shouldn't feel terrible. This ain't your fault. You're one of the few 5e players that I've read your post and could say no, this wasn't your fault. I felt bad for doing something so well. Shouldn't. This incentivized the whole point of my character. Planning in advance via divination. I will say what sucks the most about this is that this person that's the dungeon master for this game, that's the world that your character lives in now. Because that's essentially the god of that world. So if that dungeon master leaves, that character no longer exists because that world no longer exists. That's what makes it sting. This is, again, I keep going back to the whole fair and impartial referee thing. This is why that's important, right? Because that none of this had to happen. Not a single bit of this had to happen. But I suppose at the end of the day, again, this is not to bash anybody. This was a learning experience, right? So, like, again, like, because I brought up that little fact I brought up the tables and stuff, what I wanted to use. I'm getting ready to get off. I'm getting ready to end this thing. I wanted to see how my first live stream that didn't have to do with video games went. But, so yeah, that was the whole point of this was to learn something. Because if we can look at the mistakes of a dungeon master, we can learn from those mistakes, right? So, the whole point is, like, the whole point of that is to learn how to run our games better. Now, that's something that transcends editions, right? I don't have to do that for, like, for example, that not a whole lot of that's going to be totally relevant to my games because I run basic fantasy RPG, but it can be relevant in a general broad way to my games, right? Like, that's why I don't screw my players over like that. That's why I don't try to come up with power play counter plans. Now, if I so happen to have a magic user bad guy and he knows counterspell, well, he's obviously going to use it. So can't help that. But that's not geared towards a particular player. That's what makes this situation suck. This was geared to one particular player. This wasn't geared towards the entire group. This was, and I quote, to shut down that arcane eye. That is a problem, man. And I asked the player if this is somebody this is apparently somebody that I guess doesn't GM for him anymore. Thank goodness. Because I would hate to play in his games if that's how he's going to treat his players. But, anyways, I'm going to get off. I've said all I'm going to say. It's been cool doing my first live stream for a while. So, as always, take care. God bless, guys. See you on the other side.